Good evening, everyone. My name is Pamela Cornwall Duncan, and I am privileged to serve on the Education Steering Committee of the Charleston Area Justice Ministry. We are grateful you are attending this presentation on restorative practices by the Charleston Area Justice Ministry's Education Steering Committee, and we thank you for all the work you do on behalf of our children. The Charleston Area Justice Ministry, CAJM, is composed of 39 congregations that are economically, socially, religiously, racially, and ethnically diverse. Several years ago, we became very aware of and very concerned about our school's high number of suspensions, expulsions, and arrests, and the racial disparities that they showed. We worked hard to research a way to interrupt this cycle and change our school culture. We found implementing restorative practices to be a powerful remedy when it is implemented throughout a school. We refer to this as whole school implementation. Tonight, we are here to share how RP, restorative practices, can help fulfill the district's priority of creating a safe, supportive, equitable, and inclusive environment. Done right, restorative practices are woven into the fabric of everything that happens throughout the school district, helping all students and adults feel connected and valued. It is important to know that hundreds of staff have been trained across the district, and some teachers are applying some tools of restorative practices in the classroom, but the research shows that whole school implementation is necessary for success. To stay on schedule this evening, please write down your questions in the chat box as they arise, and we will do our best to answer them at the end. Also, if you experience any audio lag, we suggest you turn off your cameras if you are not presenting. Right now, we'd like to do a quick survey in the room so we can gauge what you already know about restorative practices. Please answer the poll that pops up on your screen. Thank you. Thank you for those responses. And now I would like to turn it over to Betsy McCowan Martin.
Thank you and good evening. As Ms. Duncan just said, entire school communities can benefit from the safe and supportive environment that comprehensive whole school restorative practices create. I'm going to take a few minutes to review what caused CAJM members to dig into the whole idea and the research that led us to discover and champion restorative practices. Every fall, in the process of CAJM, hundreds of CAJM members gather together in small house meetings to build relationships between each other and to share stories about whatever concerns are keeping them up at night. For years, we've heard too many stories about too many children being removed from their classrooms. The next step after house meetings is for hundreds of CAJM members to come together to hear about the top 3 concerns that were raised during the house meetings, and then to vote on which issue to address that year. In 2013, we voted to address school suspension and expulsions. Following that vote, CAJM's annual research process begins. That's when we research the problems both in our community and in communities across the nation. And we identify proven best practices that can be successfully applied here at home. That's when we learned about restorative practices, and that are recognized across the country, really across the world, as best practices by so many different and diverse groups, including the National Education Association, the American Federation of Teachers, the NAACP, the International Bullying Prevention Association, the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, even the U.S. Secret Service recommends that schools build, and they quote, a culture of safety, respect, trust, and emotional support for students, encourage communication, intervene in conflicts and bullying, and empower students to share their concerns. As they explained in their 2019 report on their analysis of targeted school violence, that type of culture is more effective than school resource officers and active shooter drills to prevent school shootings. This slide, we also began to learn more about the problems right here at home as a first step to find solutions that will work for us. We found data that matched the stories we had heard in our house meetings. Specifically, as you see here, out of school suspensions rates were 5.8 times higher for Black students than for white students. CCSD also had the largest racial disparities in the state for even academic achievement, which was 3.6 times or grades lower for Black students than white students. According to data from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights for the year 2015-16, out of all 88 school districts across South Carolina, CCSD had the largest racial disparities in discipline. The next chart that we would like to show you will show the student enrollment by racial categories, the Black, white, Hispanic, and other. The three colors show the 3 school years of 2017 to 2020. We see from the highest bars on the right of the chart that the majority of students were white. Looking at the numbers going up the left side, we see that there were essentially 23,000 white students, followed by Black, almost 19,000, then Hispanic, almost 6,000, and then smaller numbers of other categories that the district tracks. The second chart that we will see shows the number of students with one or more out of school suspensions, sorted by the same categories. We see an extra light green bar for the 2019-2020 school year. Because our schools, remember, shut down due to COVID about 75% of the way through the school year, so suspension numbers for a full year were estimated by a correction value of 1.33. Although there were more white than Black students enrolled in CCSD schools, as we saw in the first chart, here we see that most of the students with out-of-school suspensions were Black students, about 2,300 to 3,000 depending on the year. In fact, almost 5 times more Black students were suspended than white students. We were also interested in changes in suspension over time. If they were improving, you will notice, or decreasing, we'd see the 3 bars getting lower, or the bars getting lower, going from the blue to the red to the green. Unfortunately, no group shows consistent decreases in suspension across those 3 to 4 years. If anything, they seem to be getting worse. The next chart shows suspension rates by category. For example, if 15 of 100 students in any group were suspended, the suspension rate for that group would be 15%. That was the average suspension rate for Black students. It is clear that their rates were significantly higher than for any other group. In fact, they averaged over 6 times higher than white students. To put this data in perspective, let me review. Number one, according to the data from the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights for 2015-16 school year, out-of-school suspension rates were 5.8 times higher for Black students than white students in CCSD, which was in comparison, then we went to the largest disparity of all 88 school districts in South Carolina for that year. In comparison to the 2017 to 2020 data that we've seen, data indicated that the out-of-school suspension rates then averaged 6.1 times higher for Black compared to white students, indicating that the district's disparity in suspensions was not improving, but was indeed probably, yet seemed to be getting worse. In addition to this, we also looked at number of school arrest data in CAJM checked on, and we get this from our local police departments. The most recent available came from January through June of 2019. Those numbers, as you see, are alarming as well. This first chart shows the number of school arrests for Black and white students, which is how the police department categorized their data to us. Again, although there were more white than Black students enrolled in CCSD schools, there were nearly 6 times more Black students arrested from school than white students. The final data chart shows CCSD student arrest rates supported by for the same categories. We can see that Black students arrest rates were nearly 8 times, when you compare the rates, 8 times higher than for white students. Together, these charts show that our story is pretty dire, is very dire, and our need has never been greater. During the protests following the George Floyd death last summer, the CCSD Consolidated Board issued a public statement that included this quote: "There are inequities that have existed for far too long, and the consequences affect us negatively as a nation and as a community. We, as a collective board and as individual board members, pledge to do our part to rid our system of racism, hatred, violence, prejudice, and inequitable treatment as we help create a future that is bright for all the students of CCSD. We support that pledge and the steadfast visionary leadership required to create that future." Last October, CAJM surveyed all candidates running in the consolidated school board election. We are pleased to share that all of the 5 newly elected school board members responded that CCSD should use restorative practices in all schools. Next, Jacqueline Singleton Brown will introduce an excellent short video for us to watch together that shows us much about restorative practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Betsy. Next, we will share a short 7-minute video that captures the essence of restorative practices in a Baltimore elementary school. You will witness through personal testimony how the school culture was transformed. And as you are watching, consider the following questions. What does a restorative community look like? How do the students and adults interact with each other? And what is your overall reaction to the video?
Callaway Coolers roar. Callaway Coolers roar. We roar because we are respectful. We shout the way we want to be treated.
Well, I think a new family coming into Callaway, they would see that we are different in terms of how we are going to greet you, how we're going to embrace you.
Students, good morning. Be reminded that we are respectful and that we treat each other the way we want to be treated.
Here at Callaway, we've talked a lot about what a restorative community looks like. One of the main aspects of that is students knowing that they have a voice, students knowing that they can speak to a problem that they may have and know that they can come to somebody to be able to solve that problem.
Children need that. They need that time to be able to process what's going on in their lives. They're little people, but they're dealing with adult issues. To me, restorative practices helps these children to deal with everyday issues.
If I had to describe what a restorative community looks like, I would say that it is one that engages each of the individuals and tries to meet them where their needs are.
Sometimes something can happen at home or can happen at school where a kid may have a conflict and they need it resolved.
We're teaching respect, we're teaching patience, we're teaching turn-taking skills on just so many different levels, and helping the kids to work with one another.
Today we're going to be discussing a topic about friendship.
The first thing I think of when I think of restorative practices in the classroom is circles. Circles are amazing.
When I sit in a circle with my classmates, it feels like I am open and I have my own chance to have my opinion. We share what we do at home, what we like to do at school. You get to share your emotions about different things. And you also get to talk about, like, if you're in a bad mood or you have a problem, you could form a circle and then just talk about that problem.
When I think of accountability in restorative practice circles, one thing I like to think about is when a student is being accountable, they recognize what they've done and how they've made someone else feel as a result of what they've done. It's important for two things to happen. One, that the student who is in the wrong is able to understand that they've done something wrong, and for them to understand that they can get beyond it.
We always want to hold students accountable for their behavior. What we want to make sure that they know and understand is how they've impacted the community that they're in.
We're a school where we make every attempt not to be punitive, to give the student the opportunity to make the right decision, to undo their wrongs and make them right, and not so much by telling them to do it, but letting them come to the conclusion that this is the right thing to do.
The impact that we've seen over the years with the restorative practices has been one where we've seen students make better choices over time. Students that have engaged in those practices with us and have learned about making better choices and engaging in the cycle of problem solving have over time made better choices.
What we have found that truly is exciting is there has been a real transformation. After just a few months, the first year where they really focused on implementing in a big way, we were hearing from teachers the school feels different. We walk in, it's calmer. There's less shouting and screaming in the hallway, fewer fights happening, and certainly suspensions truly went down.
I think when students are used to hearing thoughts that they don't agree with all the time, they're not as overwhelmed to hear something new because they're in this constant practice of hearing things from a lot of different people, a lot of different perspectives. Students are a lot more likely to be open to their classmates and their teachers as opposed to just feeling closed off. It's about learning and changing and being willing to change.
Restorative practices has taken some time to take root at Callaway Elementary School, as it does in all of our schools. It's not an overnight fix. It's a process. We call it a restorative journey.
It's a continuing journey. Kids come in every year. I think one of the biggest challenges with restorative practice is when you have your set community of kids and a new person has to enter into the group, and just trying to get them accustomed and understanding how we do things.
We sometimes acquire students who have been maybe behavioral issues at other schools. We're talking about children who live in areas where they are taught, if someone hits you, hit them back.
Instead of letting that student come into the school and change the culture, the students at the school let that student know, this is how we resolve conflicts here, and they pull them in a positive way.
It's not fist first. That can't be our first rationale. We have to be able to use our words. We have to be able to communicate with each other.
Our community needs to know that it takes a village to raise a child, and this mindset of being restorative with students, it's going to take a change, and it's going to take the community as a whole owning how we resolve issues with one another.
Coping skills, social functioning, that all comes down to the whole restorative practice, because these are the tools that we need the kids to have so that they can grow up and be functioning adults.
Children should be happy, children should feel safe, and all of those great things that I think children should experience, and especially in school.
I love seeing the confidence build in students slowly And it makes me feel happy that it's not because of me. It's because it's something intrinsic and something that they built for themselves, and that me taking a step back allowed them to take a step up.
I will now turn this over to Cynthia Mann, who will elaborate on what we saw in the video.
Thank you, Miss Jackie. I do love that video, I have to say. I think it really gives life to the theory of our piece. With the children and the teachers in the classroom, we can see how it looks. And I think it's inspiring. Anyway, thank you for being here. I want to refer to the data that Betsy shared with us. She really showed us that the status quo is not working for so many of our students. But why are we looking to restorative practices as a remedy? And you might ask, is it just the latest fad in education to add to the alphabet soup of initiatives that have been rolled out in recent years? Well, as you've heard, we were motivated to address the dramatic numbers of children who were being disenfranchised by the school system. But restorative practices are not a quick fix for bad numbers, and the initiative will fail if it's only seen as a different approach to discipline. RP is much broader. So at its heart, restorative practices is the science of relationships and community. But what does that really mean? And what does it look like when it's in place? It means that all members of a school community, from the district office to the cafeteria lunch line, learn and adopt a set of values, principles, and behaviors. And these values and principles are best captured by some of the watchwords that you heard in the video: respect, connection, accountability, fairness. And when they're practiced, they transform a school culture. How so? Well, a school culture infused by restorative practices is a safe and supportive learning environment where everyone feels valued and respected. And as a result, everyone feels a sense of belonging and has a heightened chance to thrive. And isn't that really our chief goal? RP is based on the principle that strong relationships lead to a healthier school climate in which children can learn and everyone can flourish. And how do we know this? Well, by these results. 1, a reduced number of suspensions. 2, a shrinking gap in the racial disparity of those suspensions. 3, more student satisfaction. And 4, less disruptive student behavior. Last spring, I took part in a 2-day training in restorative practices by CCSD trainers, which was very good, by the way. And I was trained alongside district teachers, principals, law enforcement officers, and a school board member. And the trainers told us at the start, restorative practices is not another thing to add to your plate. It's the plate on which everything else rests. And that's another way of saying that when it's done right, RP is the foundation that supports everything. And the trainers went on to emphasize that RP is not just about managing discipline problems. That's a common misunderstanding. A full 80% of RP is proactive. It focuses on building community through strong relationships. The remaining 20% is responsive. It focuses on problematic behavior and on repairing the harm such behavior causes to the school community. In an RP setting, whenever problems need to be solved or decisions taken, there are open channels of communication, clear explanations, and everyone involved is treated with respect. In RP language, that's known as fair process. This doesn't mean that teachers or administrators give up their authority. That's another misunderstanding. It does mean striking a new balance, and that balance makes it clear that everyone will be held accountable while at the same time, school remains a positive learning environment rather than a punitive one. It's made explicit to all that everyone has value and everyone's voices and feelings matter, and school becomes identified with fairness. This principle of valuing everyone's voice is best reflected in the practice of restorative circles, which are the hallmark of RP. Most people who have heard of circles believe that they're typically used to mediate conflicts or address bad behavior. In fact, restorative circles are used most often by classroom teachers on a routine basis. They do this to establish norms of the classroom, to build a sense of community, and to solve or respond to minor problems and conflicts. You heard that little boy in the film talk about if he has a bad mood or a problem, people can talk about that in a circle. A trainer from Liberty Hill told our class of trainees that classroom teachers there typically run circles after the weekend so people can share the highlights of what happened or to process anything difficult that might have come up. It really makes space for learning and for the new week to begin. Now, it should be stated clearly that these are not therapy sessions, and we're not asking our teachers to be therapists on top of everything else that they do. In these kinds of community circles, everyone speaks and everyone is heard, and this fosters trust, respect, and a sense of belonging. I'm hearing feedback. The circles also promote empathy and other social emotional competence, and they blend seamlessly with the curriculum of social emotional learning that's already in place in our schools. And when there is whole school implementation, RP circles are also used to facilitate conversations at faculty and staff meetings, with parents, and really in virtually all other settings. The research also shows that in RP schools, incidents of conflict and misbehavior decline, but they do happen, of course. And in the case of a serious infraction, a restorative conference is called, restorative conference as opposed to restorative circle. This intervention is conducted by neutral facilitators and not by classroom teachers, and they often include parents and staff as well as students who all participate on a voluntary basis. They have a structured discussion of the harm that's occurred and of ways the harm can be repaired. And in this way, the school community builds accountability, reinforces community norms, and restores the brokenness of the school community. The research tells us that restorative conferences have a positive impact on high-risk students in particular. So another hallmark of an RP school is the use of effective statements. And these are a communication technique that educators use to reinforce positive behavior and redirect negative behavior. Instead of sending a disruptive student out of the room or shaming him or her, for instance, the teacher might say, "I feel disappointed that you interrupted the class discussion because I want everyone in the class to have a chance to be heard." When teachers and the other adults at school use effective statements, we know that this builds empathy, creates a connection with students, and helps them, the students, by giving them immediate feedback for conduct that's problematic. Teachers who used effective statements had fewer disciplinary referrals of Black and Brown students, according to a 2016 study from Rutgers University. So this is a lot. Changing school culture in such a comprehensive way cannot be a quick fix, as you heard someone say in the video. It takes years of investment and effort to implement RP with fidelity. In the meantime, we must be guided by the research that tells us that this kind of culture change comes only when RP is implemented throughout a school and not when RP training and practices are limited to individual teachers here and there. Success also requires the buy-in of district leaders, from the superintendent to board members and principals. All need to be trained and all need to model restorative practices in each of their school relationships and interactions. And they need to be sure their teachers get support on a regular basis for their RP practices. It is a lot, but the promising results show us it is worth the investment for the sake of our kids' future. Finally, it's important to note that adopting restorative practices in our district in a foundational way aligns with and supports core CCSD goals and priorities, which include teaching healthy social and emotional habits and strategies to our students, reducing out-of-school discipline and improving student well-being, attracting and retaining talented staff, and providing a safe, supportive, and inclusive learning environment for all students and staff. Thank you for your attention. And now we'll hear from two of our educators. The first is a teacher who recorded a video about her experience of RP, and the second is a reflection that will be read by Melissa Barrett.
Hi, my name is Natasha Akery, and I am a school teacher in Charleston County School District. I have had experience using restorative practices in the classroom for the past several years. I was trained in restorative practices through Charleston County School District through professional development opportunities. I noticed a difference in the climate of my classroom using restorative practices. But I will say that in order for restorative practices to be successful, they have to be implemented on a district level, on a school level, throughout a faculty. I think one of the most frustrating things for my students was knowing that the approaches that I used in my classroom ended when they would leave me. And so the agreements that we had, the rules that we had within my classroom, when those weren't consistent or used in other classrooms with other teachers, it was frustrating for them because it was something that worked with me. And I think they wanted to be able to continue that approach and to continue that mindset with their other teachers. If the faculty is not on board together using restorative practices, it can't succeed. It just can't. It has to be ingrained in a school's culture and overall philosophy. Teachers have to buy in and believe in it. If the teachers don't believe in it, the students will not. Also, I want to ensure that if restorative practices are implemented on a district level, that not only training is provided, but it is continually provided, where it's not a one and done deal, but there are refreshers on an annual basis, where teachers have an opportunity to collaborate and talk about successes and opportunities for growth with other educators. I have also seen restorative practices used in ways that aren't consistent with the overall philosophy. And so it can potentially become another approach that can be weaponized against students of color and Black students, which I do not have in me the strength to even begin to tolerate. We cannot approach restorative practices piecemeal or in some places and not others. There has to be an overall culture and philosophy that the entire district and all teachers, all educators, all administrators, all district officials and representatives get on board with. There is nothing more frustrating than knowing restorative practices works, but being one of the only educators who's using it in a building, where the phrase restorative practices is used, but it's not the underlying foundation of a school's culture or of a school district's culture. So, as an educator who has used restorative practices and knows that it can work, but has seen it be implemented poorly or inconsistently, I'm just, from the bottom of my heart, I am asking that as you consider using restorative practices throughout the school district, that you take these things into consideration. Thank you so much, and I appreciate your time. Hi, my name
Excuse me. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Melissa Barrett. I'll share with you responses to questions about restorative practices that we asked of Chad Ferguson, interim principal of Daniel Jenkins Academy this past spring. What were your main takeaways from your recent RP training? The Department of Alternative Programs training I went to last month made it clear to me that restorative practices are valued and taken seriously in CCSD. Restorative practices here enable and expect people to be good listeners, to be open and thoughtful with each other, and to demonstrate empathy. There are also a set of clear activities and processes that help people actually do these things, both in their everyday interactions with people and as a way to solve problems productively with each other. How does RP play out in your school? We are putting a lot of time this year into professional development around restorative practices. All of our administrators have at least some training. We sent 3 people to the first set of training this spring and 4 to the next one. We are also working with a consultant during our Wednesday afternoon professional development sessions. She is meeting with our school leadership team for 4 workshops and leading and coaching restorative practices at school. And she is working with the entire staff for 5 sessions on implementing restorative practices at school. Why do you think RP is benefiting or will benefit your school culture? Most of our students come to us with significant behavior challenges and a lot of negative past school experiences. These can make it difficult to build trust with adults and with peers. Positive relationships are critical in the work we do with students, and I'm hopeful that as we build our skills in restorative practices, we will get even better at maintaining positive relationships and achieve better outcomes for our students. Improve behavior, higher grades, more students returning to their home schools ready to succeed. Thank you all, and now we will hear from Dr. Elise Davis McFarland with more on restorative practices.
While you're reflecting on what you just heard from Ms. Akery and Ms. Barrett, let's take a moment to compare 2 different discipline systems. On the left, we have the more traditional system, and on the right, restorative practices-based system. Our student Carlos has an argument with his parents before leaving for school, and he's late for his first class. In the school with the traditional approach to discipline, he has to get through a metal detector and undergo a police search before getting to his class. His teacher scolds him for being late. He talks back, and that gets him sent to detention. While smarting from the argument with his parents, being scolded by his teacher, and having to go to detention, when he gets to the cafeteria for lunch, he gets into an altercation with another student. As a result, both boys are arrested by the school police officer and taken to juvenile detention. Carlos misses school, he has an arrest record, and he faces suspension. In the other school, which has a restorative practices culture, Carlos's teacher welcomes him even though he's coming to class late. After class, she asks him about his tardiness, and he tells her about the argument that he had with his parents. His teacher sets up a meeting for Carlos with the school counselor. When he gets into a scuffle with a student in the cafeteria, student peer mediators and support staff intervene and provide guidance that allows the 2 students to sit down and de-escalate the situation. As a result, Carlos and the other student agree to clean the cafeteria during their free period. The school counselor has Carlos's parents come to the school, and the counselor leads an interaction that helps resolve the issues between Carlos and his parents. Which system do you think is best for our children? The International Institute of Restorative Practices, or IIRP, has a tool to help us use restorative practices or restorative questions when challenging behaviors occur at home or in the classroom. These questions are, first of all, what happened? Not why did you do what you did? What were you thinking at the time? Who has been affected by what you have done, and in what way? And what do you think you need to do to make things right? They also share questions that we can ask to help those harmed by others' actions. And those questions are, what did you think when you realized what had happened? What impact has this incident had on you and others? What has been the hardest thing for you? And what do you think needs to happen to make things right? These questions are examples of how we can use restorative practices to create safe and supportive environments while building stronger relationships. So let's move on to what does the research about restorative practices show? The research is still relatively new and it's evolving, but evidence is accumulating that restorative practices do make a positive impact in school districts across the country and the world. And I'll share two examples. A RAND study of the Pittsburgh Public Schools showed that with restorative practices, first of all, school climate improves as rated by teachers. Suspension rates of African American and low-income students declined. There was also a decline in the disparity in suspension rates between African American and white students and between low-income and high-income students. This was a district where in 2013 and 2014, 20% of all students were suspended, along with 28% of all African American males. In restorative practices schools, however, suspensions decreased by 36%. Restorative practices was implemented in 2018 in Baltimore schools. Research conducted by Johns Hopkins University and the University of Maryland in 2000 found suspensions decreased by 44% in 1 year. 72% of staff reported an improved social climate. 69% of the staff reported increased respect by students for one another, and 64% of the staff reported increased respect by students for staff. A director of the Open Society of Baltimore, which is an advocate of racial equality in schools, said, restorative practices is perhaps more important now than it ever has been, in that it helps teachers and students navigate the impact that COVID-19 is having on the lives at home, it's having on their lives, both at home and at school. So what are the risks of misimplementation of restorative practices? Some of the research findings on restorative practices have been inconsistent, prompting investigators to point to uneven or spotty implementation in some school districts. This has prompted the National Education Association, to issue recommendations against what it terms misimplementation of restorative practices. It's a warning that we think is important to keep in mind as Charleston County school districts unroll restorative practices in our school. There are several misimplementations of restorative practices, and I'll share an example with you. One of the missteps that the NEA warns against is what is termed train and hope implementation. This speaks to training individuals, restorative practices techniques, and then hoping that it takes. But this approach will not result in meaningful change. Ongoing coaching and support from restorative practice leadership teams at both the district and the school levels are critical for success with implementation. So what does effective whole school implementation look like? The focus of a restorative practices program should be twofold. First, prevention, building relationships and developing community. And second, intervention, repairing harm and restoring community. So successful implementation of restorative practices requires several things. One is the entire school staff, including principals, teachers, counselors, cafeteria staff, custodians to be trained in all aspects of restorative practices and consistently modeled and using restorative practices. It also requires school staff to have periodic professional development in restorative practices. Also, a restorative practices leadership team within the school that's responsible for implementing and monitoring the restorative practices program. Also, school staff have to consistently receive periodic observation and coaching by experienced coaches. The school staff uses and has to use and model restorative practices throughout the entire day by greeting students by their name when they enter the classroom, using affective statements while they're teaching, and forming classroom circles to build community and convey core academic content. Also, it requires a district-wide leadership team to develop and implement a data collection system to collect information to determine the effectiveness of the restorative practice system and strengthen staff participation and program outcomes. This is the model that we want Charleston County School District to embrace and implement so we can have a successfully implemented restorative practices program. And finally, what are the outcomes of a successful restorative practice program? First of all, a positive climate and reduced suspensions and expulsions, a decrease in office referrals, more equitable disciplinary measures, teachers who spend most of their time teaching and modeling affective interactions with their students rather than addressing discipline and behavior issues, students who view their school as safe and welcoming, students who feel the adults in their school understand and believe in them, students who are ready to learn because their needs are being met, students who are building important life skills every day. Now, Pam Deweese will close the evening and will close this evening for us.
Thank you. On a final note, we are happy to share that just last week, CAJM Education Committee members and CCSD staff hosted a meeting for around 40 community and district leaders to build more understanding and support for district-wide implementation of restorative practices. The meeting was facilitated by the International Institute for Restorative Practices, IIRP, the consultants who have been charged with training our CCSD staff in restorative practices. The meeting was focused on possible implementation in districts 2 and 4 because they are representative of the demographics of the whole district. In this full-day summit, participants got an overview of restorative practices, a review of the data showing racial disparities in discipline practices, how RP can be helpful to our school community, and the best practices of implementation. As a follow-up, more training dates are being set, and the district has committed to holding more of these stakeholder meetings. We look forward to continued collaboration between CAJM, the district, and IIRP to strengthen our campaign to expand whole school restorative practices throughout our district. As we draw to a close, we would like to take a moment to ask a quick survey question. Do you know more about the benefits of restorative practices than you did before this evening's discussion? Thank you for your replies. CAJM often uses a slogan we call Me+3. We participate in a community action and share the word with 3 other people to spread our grassroots efforts for justice in our community. In that spirit, CAJM will be sharing an email template with you following this event that will outline how to ask for whole school implementation of restorative practices in your school. It would be wonderful to have your support as we wage our campaign for district-wide restorative practices. Will you help us advocate for whole school implementation of restorative practices in Charleston County schools? Thank you for your replies. We want to thank you again for your participation tonight in our presentation of restorative practices. If you want any follow-up on any of the data or research findings, please contact us and we'll be happy to share. Thank you again and have a great evening.